All the rain we've had throughout the state the last few days has really slowed down gardening activities. But because of our raised beds, we're able to get out and do some things today in the garden, and we're really glad that we have the raised beds. In fact, it's hard to believe that it's only been 2 days since we had more than 5 inches of rain out here at Oklahoma Gardening Studio. But still, because of the raised beds, we can do some things. And if you've got raised beds at home, I know you also can get out and do some gardening, but if you don't have raised beds, if you've got your garden in a more conventional manner, then there are some things that you really ought to keep in mind when working in the soil. For example, don't work on this wet soil or don't walk on it and travel on it except just with a minimum amount of activity. But if you can get out and kind of rough the top of the soil like I've done on this raised bed, it will help move the soil, the moisture out of the soil much more rapidly. And with the wind's action and a little bit of sunshine, you'll find that your soil will dry much more quickly if you can rough it up a little bit and leave it rough. And in fact, today as I worked up this bed where we're planting our cole crops, I'm going to leave it roughed up like this instead of raking it, smoothing it back down, because that will also help dry it out. So we are planting cole crops in the garden today. If you're not planting your cole crops, I'd recommend you do it just as quickly as possible, because they like to go out sometime in the month of March, and certainly by the time we get into late March, then we need to be getting those in the garden. Select transplants that are large, well-formed, healthy, and have also been well-conditioned to the out-of-doors, such as we have here. Now, the transplants that I'm putting in the garden today are broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. And I'm putting these, of course, these transplants have been grown into peat pots, and I really like the transplants in the peat pots because you can just bury the entire pot without disturbing the root system. But you notice that I've peeled off the top around this a little bit because I want to be sure that this peat pot is not exposed to the atmosphere, because if it is, this oftentimes serves as a wick, and the wind and the sun can just draw that moisture from around the roots, and you'll find that they won't get started nearly as quickly if this peat pot is exposed. So although my soil is wet, I can still work in it, but again, like a ground bed, I would want to just do a minimum amount of activity in this soil as far as packing, and then I can come in later on and maybe reposition these plants if I need to, if they've dried out, if the soil has dried out some, or again, rake around these a little bit to help dry the soil out even more. This first variety of broccoli that I'm planting is premium crop. It's an old standby in Oklahoma, but yet an excellent crop, not only for spring planting, but also for fall planting. But there's a lot of other varieties that we can choose. And I'm going to be talking about some of the other varieties in just a couple of minutes, not only of broccoli, but some of the other crops that we have here. But one of the things I also want to mention at this point is that when planting the cole crops, keep in mind that they're heavy feeders. And so I've already gone in and fertilized this bed with a complete fertilizer, so it will have a good supply of phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen. But as I'm planting, I also want to give these plants a little bit of a starter solution. This is not, of course, to give them moisture around the plant now, but it is to give them a high phosphorus feeding to help get that root system established, and also to seal that soil a little bit around the plant roots. That's another important reason for using a transplant solution, because it does put some water around there and kind of seals those air pockets off from those roots. Well, some other varieties that we're going to be planting today in the garden are Green Comet. Green Comet is another broccoli that's an old standby for Oklahoma gardens, and I think one that you'll find in most all the garden centers around the state, and one that's very successful throughout most of Oklahoma. So this might be another variety that you'd want to choose if you haven't chosen the varieties yet of the plants that you want to plant in the garden. Now, actually, broccoli likes a space of about 18 inches apart, because it does get a really, makes a very large plant. And if this plant has enough room to grow and spread, then you can go ahead and cut that main flower out of the broccoli as it begins to mature. And then with all the side branches that you've got, of course, you'll get a lot of side shoots also. So try to give about 18 inches at least in spacing between your plants. Although I found that in raised beds, because we do have good air circulation around the plants, and because there is some height to the plant, you can actually plant these a little bit closer in raised beds than you may want to in a more conventional planting. Well, some other varieties we're going to be planting later on in the garden today it's Northern King. This is a rather new variety of broccoli, one we've not tried yet, but yet the catalogs and the research here at OSU agree that it's a very good broccoli, and so I think we'll be excited to see how that one turns out also. Some other cold crops that need to go in now in addition to broccoli are cauliflower. This is a variety of cauliflower called Snow Crown. Snow Crown is a cauliflower that makes a nice, big, good white head, and also one that is very compact and very dense. Snow Crown is one of the varieties that you see a lot in the supermarkets because it is a commercial variety also, but a real good variety for home gardens. And we have another variety of cauliflower that I'll be mentioning in just a few minutes. It's up at the end. It's a sort of a new variety. It's kind of an interesting one to look at. We're planting 2 varieties of cabbage. I always like to have some red cabbage in the garden because red cabbage has sort of a uniqueness about itself. It has a little bit of a more mild flavor than some of the other cabbages, and also it gives a lot of color to fresh salads and to slaws. So if you've not tried some red cabbage, try some this year. This one we're planting is called Redhead, obviously a red-headed cabbage. Another variety of cabbage we're planting is one called Conquest. Again, it's a fairly new variety and a commercial variety, and we've not tried it here in Oklahoma Garden. We're excited to see how it works out also. Now, many of the cabbage varieties that you're going to see today in the marketplace are those cabbage varieties that are hybrids that mature really uniformly. So if you plant 12 plants of cabbage in your garden, chances are you're going to get 12 heads of cabbage within just a short period of time of each other. So this may be something you want to keep in mind, is that if you're planting cabbage, plant several varieties, or maybe only 2 or 3 plants of several varieties, so that at least you'll have cabbage that's maturing at sort of in a staggered pattern in your garden, unless you like a lot of cabbage all at once. This may be something you want to do. Now, another variety of cauliflower that I mentioned is one called Romanesco. Now, this is a sort of an unusual variety also. This one has a real different type of head on it. The head sort of comes up in a sort of a spiral fashion. It might remind you of the top of a soft serve ice cream cone or something. But it's one that's going to be, I think, really unique for us to try here, and one that we're going to be anxious to see how it turns out also. This is probably not a variety that you're going to find in many garden stores now, which again I think is a good reason that you may want to go out sometime and look through the seed catalogs and try some of these new varieties in your garden each year that may not be available locally, but you can purchase the seeds and grow them yourselves.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.